I've lived completely isolated in this decaying forest for 2 long years. When you spend that much time away from the noise of civilization, you learn the secret language of the woods. You learn to interpret the groans of the rotting pines, the scraping of frozen branches against the roof, and the uneasy, shifting groans on the winter earth. I thought I knew every danger these woods had to offer. I thought the wolves and the bitter cold were the only things I had to fear. I was wrong. And tonight, at exactly midnight, the woods didn't just go quiet, they died. The crickets abruptly stopped mid-chirp. The owls ceased their hunting calls. A heavy, freezing atmospheric pressure dropped over my cabin. So dense and suffocating, it felt like being buried alive under 10 feet of wet dirt. My throat was parched, and I had a phantom taste of copper in my mouth. Needing water, I stepped out into the moonless night, the freezing air biting at my skin. I walked toward the ancient stone well, sitting like a jagged, broken tooth behind my cabin. I hooked my heavy iron bucket to the coarse hemp rope and lowered it down into the throat of earth. Down, down, down it went, into an absolute blackness that seemed to swallow the light of the stars. I waited, listening for the familiar, echoing splash of the deep groundwater. It didn't hit water. It is something soft, something wet, something sickeningly dense. It landed with a muffled, fleshy thud. My hands froze on the wooden crank. The air rising from the well shaft suddenly smelled intensely of old blood. Iron. A sharp spike of panic shot up my spine. Frantically, I began to crank the rusted iron wheel to pull the bucket up. Clack, clack, clack. The sound echoed too loudly in the dead silence. Suddenly, the hemp rope didn't just get heavy. It jerked violently downward. Snap! The rope nearly tore through my calloused palms. Something deep in the pitch black dirt was pulling back. It was wrestling me for the bucket, a rhythmic, powerful tugging that felt like the pulse of a massive buried heart. I hauled the bucket over the mossy stone edge. I expected a drowned animal, expected ruined black water, but what sat in the bucket? The bucket was overflowing with a clotted, pulsing mass of black mud, and threaded through the soles were yards of wet, coarse human hair. The hair wasn't static. It was actively writhing, coiling and twisting through the mud like a nest of starving worms. And then, right before my eyes, the strands began to reach over the lip of the bucket, groping blindly for the stone edge. I screamed, dropping the rope, and fled towards the cabin. I bolted inside, slammed the heavy wooden beams across the frame, and pressed my spine against the oak planks, gasping for air. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to break free. I tried to tell myself it was a hallucination. The isolation had finally driven me mad. But the security of my home was totally illusion. The familiar comforting scent of wood smoke and dried lavender was instantly obliterated by a wave of pure, unadulterated rot. A smell of open graves, ancient mud, and long decomposed flesh. I looked down at my feet and my blood turned to ice. A thick, viscous black ooze was aggressively vomiting itself through the cracks under the front door. The sludge was alive. It bubbled and hissed, packed with the miles of those same along. As the ooze expanded across the floorboards, it literally ate through the wood, melting the heavy timbers with a faint, venomous hiss that filled the room with a choking, acidic smoke. I backed away, stumbling blindly into the furthest, darkest corner of the cabin. My boots splashed into the creeping ooze, which was already pooling around my ankles. It felt freezing cold, yet it burned my skin like acid. All at once, I reached behind me, grabbing a rusted iron hatchet from the wall mount, gripping the handle until my hands shook. A wet, heavy, dragging sound began just outside. I can hear it, dragging its heavy, bloated weight across the porch. and now the wood splinters as the doorframe groans. A silver of pale moonlight cut through the window, illuminating the grotesque, waterlogged nightmare standing in the center of my room. It was towering, distorted, and vaguely human shaped, but it had absolutely no face. Where eyes, a nose, and lips should have been, there was only a bloated, rotting mass of translucent grey flesh, entirely bound, restricted, and choked by miles of tangled, dripping black hair. It moved with a sickening insect-like speed, its limbs snapping into impossible, broken angles as it lunged across the room at me. I screamed, a primal sound of pure terror, and swung the rusted hatchet with all my strength. The blade buried itself deep into the wet, spongy mass of its shoulder, but there was no bones to stop it. It was like chopping into dense, rotten meat. A spray of freezing black salt hit my face, burning my eyes, filling my nostrils with the stench of the grave. The creature didn't even slow down. It didn't feel pain. Its long, icy fingers wrapped around my throat. The grip was like an iron vice, squeezing until my vision blurred into the grey static. But it didn't want to choke me to death. That would have been mercy. It wanted something far worse. With all my strength, the blade buried itself deep into the wet, spongy mass of its shoulder, but there was no bones to stop it. It was like chopping into dense, rotten meat. A spray of freezing black salt hit my face, burning my eyes, filling my nostrils with the stench of the grave. The creature didn't even slow down. It didn't feel pain. Its long, icy fingers wrapped around my throat. The grip was like an iron vice, squeezing until my vision blurred into the grey static. But it didn't want to choke me to death. That would have been mercy. It wanted something far worse.